All right, now, next segment here. Okay, we looked at the concept of law and gospel as far as uses of the law. And I want to do just a little bit on distinguishing law and gospel because most of our errors theologically will fall into people confusing law and gospel in some sense. As I mentioned in the last segment, there's a law in a state of innocence, law in a fallen sinful state, and then law in a restored state of grace. Okay, but remember, you can't be saved by law. So here's the problem. Again, in understanding the scriptures, if you mess up this distinction, here's how it ends up. Okay, and this will be a pretty short segment here. But remember, law as a basic concept is God giving the demands for righteous obedience. Okay, it is normative in the sense that it's the way things ought to be. And why is it the way things ought to be? Because again, it's grounded in God's immutable internal holiness, which is externally expressed. That can't change. So that's law. And again, why? Because we're made in the image of God and wired to be blessed or happy when we're holy. Okay, when we're in those holy, loving relationships. That's our ultimate form of blessedness. Every human being on the planet wants to love and be loved in meaningful ways. That's what everyone is aspiring to, and to have a sense of, again, of meaning about our lives, and that they're worth something, and that other people care about us. That's what everybody seeks. So the idea of law is maintaining righteous, loving standards to maintain those relationships. And again, gospel is the offer of free forgiveness and reconciliation based on God's substitutionary provision and satisfaction for the offending party. Okay, that's law and gospel. So what happens when we confuse these? Okay, well, here's the consequence for ignoring the distinction. And I've got some verses listed in the syllabus, roughly around page 9 for how this works. But here's the consequences for this. If you ignore the law-gospel distinction, the first consequence is legalism. Right? If you really think law has the ability to save you, now you're a legalist. Okay? Well, but now again, so we see this is that you're giving law the properties of gospel, which it doesn't have. And so we know through this is that again, the law of God is not abrogated, it doesn't go away, it remains forever. But as soon as you're saying the law can save you, now you have a basis for your own self-righteousness and that you're a good person, you're going to save yourself. And Paul says, again, in Galatians, if righteousness comes through the law, then Christ died needlessly. By grace you have been saved through faith, not of yourselves. It's a gift of God, not by works. We see this over and over and over, okay? So again, the confusion of every world religion and false and confused forms of Christianity is to say law somehow has gospel properties and can save you. Now, again, the flip side of that is that occasionally you see these movements in the church of antinomianism. Okay, antinomianism is what it sounds like. Okay, it's anti-law. Okay, anti-nomos, anti-law. You're against the law. In other words, now there's no law for you. Actually, not. Remember, be holy, for I am holy. You're saved unto good works that God has appointed beforehand that you should walk in them. No, the moral law has not been abrogated, as we have already come to say here. In fact, Paul says, 1 Timothy 1:8, the law is good if one uses it lawfully. Other statements, civil use of the law. What's interesting, though, is 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8, is that one of the titles for the Antichrist is the lawless one, antinomos, annomos. So one of the things that typifies the Antichrist is he's against the law of God. So all I can say to you is, you don't want to be a legalist, but you also don't want to be an antinomian. In fact, Dietrich Bonhoeffer called the antinomian view basically cheap grace, okay? Or as we call it, sloppy agape and greasy grace. Somehow I'm saved so I can go do whatever I want. Now, freedom in Christ is the freedom to follow God and be holy, that the chains of sin that were dragging you down have been removed. It's for freedom that Christ has set you free. Do not return again to a yoke of slavery, okay? So that's where we're at. So again, that's the problem if we confuse, again, law and gospel, is that no, law does not have gospel properties. And when we see this kind of thing, here's the problem when it works in the human race. Consequence of ignoring the distinction is that, again, everything from Marxism to capitalism, somehow, if we put the right law in place, all goodness and everything will be taken care of. So Marxism says, no, we have to, get rid of the ruling capitalists, and somehow, if we have the right law, we're going to have paradise. Capitalists, and again, there's different views on this, but somehow if we have the right capitalist world, everything's going to be right. No, it's not. That's just legalism on a political level. That's not going to restore or change inherently the human heart or instruct in moral righteousness. So we need to be really careful about how we think about these things, because even, I like politics, I like civil government, but we need to be careful about becoming legalists and somehow we're going to fix the entire world by legal structures. There's one way you fix the human heart, and that's by being born again, by knowing and believing the gospel. And from there, you can fix your family relationships, your friendship relationships, your political relationships, and everything else. But they're not fixed by changing external standards. Okay, so that's, again, law and gospel and the consequences of ignoring the distinction. Next, we're going to look at a few other issues before we end up some of our other areas of the doctrine of sin. We'll continue with that. Thanks.